Creator of the stars of night, your people's everlasting light, O Christ, Redeemer of us all, we pray you hear us when we call. Those words from the Advent hymn we just sang, you know the one, are often sung at the Vesper hinge when the day leans into night. In a sense, the season of Advent begins at that hinge every year and leads us into the dark, waiting on the light of Christ to come again. And by and large, in the dark, we look for Christ to come as a child. But this morning, Jesus reminds us to look for him to come as the Son of Man, to lift our eyes to the sun, the moon, the stars, full of signs. While we praise the Holy Child with countless carols, it's hard to believe the Son of Man shows up in the hymnal at all. Even when, lo, we sense his apocalyptic figure among the stars of night or with clouds descending, I'm guessing most of us would rather hurry home to Mother Mary like children afraid of the dark. And lucky for us, this year it's St. Luke's turn to tell the story, to remember Jesus invoking the Son of Man, which means we don't have to hear him mention tribulation or tell us the sun and the moon and the stars will grow dark and the stars fall from heaven. Luke mentions distress among the nations and the roaring of the sea. That earlier part about tribulation is how Matthew and Mark remember things, but Luke simplifies it, saying there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth, distress among the nations. It's an elegant nod toward tribulation without saying tribulation. And instead of remembering Jesus gathering his elect, understood to be a chosen few spared from disaster, Luke imagines it coming upon all of us. Luke remembers him also saying, "Look up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." And though he tells us heaven and earth will pass away, underneath it all, Luke can't help but love the meantime in which we live, in which he lived, and can't wait to tell the soon-to-unfold history of the church. Apparently, in Luke's gospel, Jesus is in no hurry to burn down the house. Though it will happen. This world, after all, is the place where the nearness of God is a felt and given thing. Among us here and now, extricated in human history, in your history, through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. All of that to confess that in the gospel, according to Luke, Jesus appears to me more beloved Son of Mary than apocalyptic Son of Man. And you too may land on one side or the other of that Advent tension. Likely, the more comfortable you are with the world as it is, with its tender gifts, the closer you lean toward the newborn child. While the more troubled you are by the world as it is, by its terrible injustices and cruelties, the closer you lean toward the hope of apocalypse. Either way, Advent calls you to look for the nearness of your redemption, coming as the Son of Man sent as judgment on all your days, and coming as the Son of God, born of Mary, sent to dwell with you here and now. They are one and the same, Lord Christ. The invitation is to embrace the tension of Advent, preparing for the Son of Mary and the Son of Man all at once, It's like learning to sing lullabies in a hurricane. And keep in mind, this tension isn't for a season only. It's a tension the gospel asks you to live into and with all the time. A tension between cosmic tribulation and your own history. Between a coming judgment beyond your control and the hope of making your home here. Both ends of that tension speak to our shared dependence on God, creator of the stars. Years ago, in a season of personal tribulation, I used to go outside night after night and sit in the dark after dinner. I'd go outside and stare into the sky and feel how small I was. There's nothing like a night sky to make you feel small, to remind you of the bigness of God. I'd always thought God was my friend. I didn't think he was the swellest guy I knew, but I thought he was a God who pretty much shared my ideas about how life ought to play out. And yet one day, I came to the end of that comfort. What happened was my life wasn't turning out like I wanted it to. And lifting my head, the stars overhead seemed so little moved by my worries. I sensed in their distance the transcendence of God in no hurry to do my bidding. I sensed the glory and exalted majesty of God. I sensed a rain from on high, and it made me feel helpless and alone. So like a child afraid of the dark, I turned away from the stars and stared instead at the windows of my own house. Every night, those windows were full of house light. House light is a nearer, more intimate kind of light than starlight. It's also easier to manage, the sort of thing you can turn on and off. And this particular house light, the light of my own household, illuminated a life I wanted to keep just as it was, not going anywhere, letting go of nothing. Everybody right where I needed them to be. But in my heart, I already knew it was falling apart. It's why I stood outside, staring in, wondering what to do next, praying, oh God, oh God, oh God. I didn't know it then, but those were Advent prayers arriving in late summer. The prayers of Advent always come with a little string of O's, small, intimate sounds said with fear and hope, and sometimes in wonder. Oh wisdom, oh dayspring, oh desire, oh God. Outside, while I was stalking the life of my own household and feeling the weight, the heaviness of my own failures, under the cold distance of starlight, God led me back into the house, into my ruined house. Not to home as I wanted it or had known it, but to the nearness of God and the reality of my life, to Advent. Every year, Advent invites you to leave the comfort of home and go outside and stand in the dark. Invites you to look up and take in the majesty of stars and to remember the creator of those stars. How dreadful, how dear, how needful, how near. O Christ, Redeemer of us all, we pray you hear us when we call.